Hello and a very warm welcome to the Rethinking Cyber podcast with me, your host, Rebecca McLaughlin-Easton. We are delighted to return with this second series of in-depth and insightful conversations with thought leaders and global industry experts as we continue to raise awareness of the challenges and opportunities surrounding cyberspace. My guests join me ahead of this November's Global Cybersecurity Forum in Riyadh, which this year has the theme of charting shared priorities in cyberspace. Today's guest is Robert Lee, the CEO and co-founder of Dragos, a global technology leader in cybersecurity for industrial control systems and operational technology environments. Robert is a recognized authority in the industrial cybersecurity community, and his advice is regularly sought by national leaders. Robert, it's great to speak to you today. How are you?
Thanks. Happy to be here. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. We're delighted to have you in the hot seat. Talk to me about what you do and how you first got started.
Yeah, so I'm the CEO and co-founder over at Dragos. Dragos is an industrial cybersecurity firm. So think industrial automation environments, kind of operations technology or industrial control systems. And we're a cybersecurity technology company. So we make technology like the Dragos platform, which goes into these facilities on the operations side of the house to help customers get an understanding of what they have, like their asset inventory, and get visibility into the environments. How is it being communicated to? What commands are being sent in the automation environment? What vulnerability exists? Visibility into the threats, et cetera. And then we pair that up with services like incident response and pen testing. And we also pair that up with our intelligence, which is threat intelligence, is kind of the understanding of the adversaries and vulnerabilities that matter, so that we take priority and prioritization in how we respond. And in terms of my background, I started out in the U.S. military. I spent most of my time over the U.S. intelligence community and built a first of its kind mission looking at state actors breaking into industrial facilities around the world. And then I've been involved in pretty much all the major incident response cases to happen, including, up to recent, where I led the OT portion of the Colonial Pipeline response. So been at kind of the forefront of a lot of these attacks, and happy to be here and share the insights.
We're delighted to have your insights. Let me zoom out for a moment, and under the GCF themed cyberspace amidst polycrisis, talk to me about what you understand the polycrisis to be, the intersection obviously of several crises, economic and climate, geopolitical, for example, but how does this have a ripple effect?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that we're all trying to manage for sure, and polycrisis is definitely a good way to state it. As you mentioned, with the crises that you have, but then coming out of COVID, coming out with macroeconomic conditions, there's a lot going on. And when you look at all the various crises, some of them don't immediately have a cybersecurity nexus, right? Like a economic crisis is not going to cause adversaries to attack more. But when you have companies that are operating already on kind of a razor's thin edge, and they have so much that they're being faced with, they just can't afford to have cyber attacks right now. And so the things that don't directly impact cyber, still, I would say that they impact the overall environment and the macro environment in such a way that the necessity of cybersecurity is just that much more important. And there's some that directly impact. So there's obviously conflict going on. There's tension between other countries. And I think what everyone needs to fully appreciate, and we have plenty of documentation around this and precedents over the years, but whether or not it's the appropriate thing, the reality is critical infrastructure is always seen as a valid target. So when you have tension, if not conflict, what you will see is state actors and criminals increasing the targeting of industrial companies and critical infrastructure companies like power grids, water, saline plants, oil and gas, infrastructure, rail, data centers, these operations environments. So you see an increased targeting of them, if for nothing more than to get access into reconnaissance. And you also then see capability development. And what one of the unique things is around industrial environments is for years, it was very, very difficult to have an attack that would scale beyond a facility or two. So if you wanted to do espionage, you could scale it, no problem. You can do thousands of the companies. But if you want to develop a capability of disruption, if not destruction, because of the heterogeneous nature, because of the differences in our infrastructure from one plant to another, let alone one country to another, because of those differences, scaling attacks was very, very difficult. But now we operate with a lot of common systems, common operating stacks, common software, common communication protocols. We have a very homogenous environment these days. And for the first time ever, we're starting to see capabilities get developed that can be used cross industry. Good examples, and I guess a year and a half ago, our firm Dragos worked very closely with some of our partners, to include the US government, where we found an adversary out there, a state actor, developing a capability we called Pipe Dream, which is the first time ever that we've seen a capability, malicious software that can be used at scale, repeated, cross industry for disruption, if not destructive purposes. That adds complexity to what we do. And it definitely adds sort of the urgency into the problem. So you have those type of capabilities which are now possible and being developed. In these moments of tension and polycrises, you are going to see new capabilities get developed, whether or not they get used. And because of the nature of our environments, it can proliferate really quickly. So an actor in one country developing a capability to be used against another country, that can proliferate very quickly to others and non-state actors just by the nature of these environments. So it's just really, really important that we understand that the environment's changing and that the threats are becoming more and more capable. And because of these changes, we have to do something different in these operation environments.
It's exactly the heart of the matter, isn't it? Environmental influences and attacks and threats may change, but of course we too have to change our behavior and our defenses. Surely better collaboration, partnership, sharing of information would help, as you speak truth to power, as you have done with President Biden. Is there a willingness for countries to do that, to share information, to strengthen the global defense?
I think that there is definitely a willingness. We have a lot of conversations and multinational conversations around information sharing, as an example. And so the processes are there, the willingness is there. But what most people are realizing is not as much has been done in the operations environments as people think. So a lot of companies and a lot of executives, boards, and policymakers see the enterprise IT cybersecurity efforts, which are numerous, and people have done a phenomenal job in the enterprise IT environments, information technology environments. And they look at all that we've done in cybersecurity. And they go, yeah, but that's in the enterprise. The critical part of critical infrastructure is the automation side of the house. And we historically haven't done anything but preventative measures like patching, firewalls, segmentation, like security controls are designed to prevent something. But if you want to do information sharing and understand the threats and actually understand the risk and understand what you need to do about it and be able to respond to it, you got to have visibility. You got to know what's in your environment, from your own assets to the adversaries. In other words, you have to have detection capabilities, and you have to be able to respond, because those are the lessons learned and insights that you're sharing, not, hey, nothing happened, the plant's up, the prevention is good. Well, there's not a lot to share about that. Hey, turns out though, prevention fails sometimes, actually quite often. And we detected these things that took place, and let's share those to others to help design better protections and better detection methods. That's what's necessary. So if you have, I would say, well less than 95% of the global infrastructure community is monitoring inside of their industrial networks. So if less than 95% of the global infrastructure community is actually turning the lights on in these factories and plants and so forth, there's not a whole lot to share.
Drilling down deeper into that, how can public-private partnerships, the famous PPPs, be strengthened to really enhance cyber resilience during times of polycrisis?
Yeah, I recently testified at the U.S. Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee and brought up this point, which I always get asked, how do we do this better? How can we finally make private sector and public sector work together and so forth? And I think there's a very basic model that facilitates that, and we've seen it work really, really well. And that model is, it is up to the government of any different country to identify the why. Why do we need to do something different? Why do we need to change? There's costs associated with change. We are currently in one state. You want us to do something else. Why are we doing this? In other words, set the requirements with the education to gain the buy-in on why is this important to us from a national security perspective or otherwise. So government should set the why. Government should set the what. What outcome do we want to achieve together? Like, let's take a leadership role. That's the right place for government. What outcome do we want to achieve? But leave the how. How are we going to achieve that outcome? Leave the how to the private sector. A gas pipeline company knows how to operate a gas pipeline better than any government. And they also understand what will and won't work in terms of security controls But if you were just to tell people, go be cyber safe or cyber secure or go be resilient, like none of those are requirements. There's a million different ways to get to that. But if we set real requirements like, hey, we're concerned that there are state actors that are targeting the US electric system, and we don't have currently the ability to detect and respond to those. And so even if the government had classified intelligence to share you, you wouldn't be able to action it. So that's why we're doing this. What we want the outcome to be is for us to be able to have a confidence in that electric utilities are able to monitor and get visibility inside of substation, generation, control center kind of environments, and that we can, as a government, share with you the tactics and techniques or the methods of these adversaries, and you'll be able to look for them, which will now allow us to partner together. So that's the what. Utilities, why don't you go figure out how to do that? And that exact example we saw. The Biden administration launched a 100-day action plan in the United States. It was exactly like I just articulated in terms of the why and the what. And over 100 electric utilities went around the country deploying technology to get that picture. And now we have kind of a community-wide monitoring where there's multiple success stories already that we found where government and private sector have worked together to find adversaries before they were successful in their attacks, not just after. So when governments define the why and the what, stay out of the how, I find that it works extraordinarily well.
What's your level of optimism about more governments getting there?
There's a couple that we're having conversations with and taking those lessons learned, because we had a role in that from a technology perspective, and just sharing those lessons learned. I'm optimistic that the information is going to be available to everybody. Now, who all acts on it, it's going to take willpower and some actual desire to cause change, right? But I'm working probably with 5 or 6 different major governments that are looking to go that direction. So better than it's been before.
Certainly sounds like it. Talk to me about lessons that we can learn from past crises. Looking back on previous cybersecurity incidents during times of great tension, how do they inform our approach to future challenges? And are there any best practices or some good examples that you would point to when it comes to collective action that we can build upon?
Yeah, I think, one of the things we faced recently was just a really interesting case study where kind of this framework deployed and a number of utilities as well, manufacturers, oil and gas providers use our technology. So I'm not trying to say this is the only way to do it, but it's the example I can pull from. And in our technology, besides the fact that it monitors in these environments, we have this program or technology built on top of it called Neighborhood Keeper that allows everybody to share the insights of their environment at the same time without sharing their identity or the data itself. So it's completely non-invasive, but people can see what's going on from threats and vulnerabilities without getting access to anything sensitive or otherwise confidential. And it's all in real time. Anyway, so just to set that as a backdrop, what ended up happening recently, I thought was just a really good example of government and private sector working together and learning from a crisis. So the US government, through their sources and methods, I imagine the intelligence community, but who knows, but through their sources and methods, found that there was a competitive state actor. So in one of their adversaries in this context, found out that they were developing new capabilities and exploits against unknown or zero day, if you will, unknown vulnerabilities in Rockwell automation products. And Rockwell is one of the global leaders and manufacturers in automation equipment. So their equipment is everywhere. So the US government used their unique capabilities, their unique sources, their unique methods to go find out about these capabilities getting developed before the adversary even could use them, contacted Rockwell, collaborated with them as the manufacturer, sharing what they knew, learning from Rockwell about the equipment, because who knows the equipment better than Rockwell, coming up with defensive guidance, then brought us in, I brought Dragos in and said, hey, can you share your analysis? Here's what we're seeing. Our analyst added some analysis and context and defensive recommendations. And then we pushed it all out across Neighborhood Keeper so that every one of our customers had all the insights and all the detections and all the defensive mechanisms like days before anything ever became public. And so before any attack was ever launched, people were already protected against it through collective action, through partnership, through collaboration, through government playing to its strengths and private sector playing to its strengths. And I just think that's an amazing example of how it can work. And again, it's not this technology or that technology. It's just this approach can work. And we've seen it work really well.
With emerging tech, especially with AI, quantum computing, rapidly influencing, of course, the dynamics of polycrisis in cyberspace, what, in your valued opinion, needs to be done to really harness them for stability? Do we have the basics in place?
Yeah, from a cybersecurity perspective, I'm not so sure that these technologies and advancements are going to be as impactful as people think, at least definitely not in the near term. I don't think we have the basics in place. If you look at the water sector in most countries, many of the water companies, though they're good companies, they just don't have the same level of resourcing that other companies do. You'll find in the United States, as an example, a lot of our smaller water municipality systems that people depend on in their towns, every 4 to 6 of them share one IT person on contract. Maybe they have a firewall. They don't need quantum. They don't need AI. They don't need blockchain and all this other stuff. They need the basics. And they don't even have the basics in place where they could even take advantage of those things, even if they did provide the value, which we really haven't seen yet on a cybersecurity discussion. AI and quantum and all these others and supercomputing and similar have a lot of value and will be disruptive if not handled correctly to society in general. I mean, even if you just look at the ability for call centers, how many jobs globally are there in call centers? And you could probably, to the state of AI today, completely automate out all call centers tomorrow. That would be very disruptive from an unemployment perspective, from a civil perspective. Like you have to think through those things.
How much of a social conscience or responsibility do we have? Arguably, it weighs heavy, but is it considered enough, especially by policymakers and mass industry, when it comes to people being put out of jobs?
It's not considered enough. At the high level, it's talked about, but I don't think, again, it takes a lot of political willpower of any country to actually step in and say, let's be experts enough on this to set the why and the what, but not the how. And that is new on this topic. And so, look, I am worried about that piece. I think that's where, a lot of the pioneers in AI, as an example, are coming out saying, hey, let's pause the technology. Let's pause and think about this. And people are just assuming that it's because they think it's Skynet and the Terminators are coming and they're going to kill us all. And like, that's not it. That most of the people that I talk to in those circles, it's not the news headline grabbing stuff that they're worried about. It's the societal impact. If you take US unemployment from, let's say, 4.5% and take it to 10% in a month, what does that do society wise? I mean, that's crippling. And so, no, I don't think we're having those conversations because they get into conversations of how do you take care of people? I mean, there's debates that need to be had on things like universal basic income. Like, is it a good thing for society or not? Like there's whole discussions that have got to take place before we have rapid societal change. And I think that is unfortunately not happening, at least not transparently, in a way that I think action is going to be born out of it. I think there'll be committees and papers and recommendations, but you need strong action to prepare yourself for these type of technology changes. And to link it back to cybersecurity, I have similar conversations with executives at oil and gas and manufacturing chemical companies, et cetera, where they go, hey, we want to take advantage of cloud and analytics and predictive maintenance and digital transformation. I go, that's awesome. Those technologies are there, ready to be taken advantage of, and they will make you more competitive. Oh, by the way, you don't have the basics of cybersecurity in your automation environments done to facilitate that journey safely. So you always have to assess, where do I want to go and what do I need to do to get there? And sometimes people get so excited about technology and changes that they forget to assess where they are.
Ahead of the Global Cybersecurity Forum taking place in Riyadh, of which you're very familiar, the theme this year will be charting shared priorities in cyberspace. What do you suspect will be the hot topic, the thing floating to the top of conversations with delegates gathering in the capital of Saudi?
Well, everybody's going to have their thing to focus on, whether it's AI, quantum, industrial security, risk management of a country. Everyone's going to be thinking about all those things, but it all does come back to the priority, which is, how do we take care of our communities? How do you do it well? How do you do it with a societal change? How do you, think about these industrial facilities as an example. Every one of these industrial facilities is manned and operated by people in the area. So we all live and work in the communities that we serve. And safety is the number one thing all of us think about. Like, I have 2 kids. I want them to grow up in a world that has safe lights, water, manufactured goods, et cetera. You can't tell me that anything else rises above that priority for me. Everything else I talk about is just a derivative of how to get there. And I think you'll see the same thing at the GCF. One of the things I've always admired about the Saudis in general, but I think really comes out in GCF, even though it is a global conference, is there is that absolute culture of, how do we take care of each other? How do we take care of our communities? How do we use our expertise for the benefit of others? And I think that aspect is unifying, and I think it's uniting across political and geopolitical sort of allegiances and tension. And I think if we all go into the GCF with, hey, we need to talk about cybersecurity and what it can do for us, and especially in key areas like industrial infrastructure, but let's have a priority of knowing that we're all here because we want our families to be safe and grow up in a prosperous world. I think we can get to some really good conversations.
And just to really refine the point, what is the most important actionable step, the most important priority for policymakers and decision makers to advance collective action for cyber stability, for our children, for our communities amidst polycrisis?
They've got to set requirements, and you got to be honest about where we are. If we all want to get out in front of board meetings and policymakers and executive staff, whatever, and go, we're in a really good place and we've done so much, and look, the risk is low, but we want to move another inch. I think that's very misleading. And when we're not uncomfortable with the truth, then we're not going to drive change. But if we can all go, what do we actually need to get done? What are the real requirements? And then we can take a really honest look at where we are and go, okay, nobody did anything wrong, but our environments have changed drastically. The environment has changed drastically in the geopolitical context, and our threats are far more capable and have changed drastically. Therefore, we need to move the sense of urgency and change drastically. If we can have those honest conversations, we'll be fine. If we get to conversations of, yeah, we're doing a ton, but we'd like to do a little bit more, and well, we can exist and operate inside the existing parameters, and maybe we just move the needle a little, like, then we're not going to change anything. And I've seen that conversation happen way too often.
And on that note, Robert, we thank you for your honest conversation and sharing your expertise with us today. And thank you also for your continued support of GCF. We very much look forward to seeing you again soon. But for now, thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. And looking forward to the GCF. And the reality is, at the end of the day, defense is doable. So we can do it.
We can do it. Thank you, Robert. And so it just remains for me to also thank you, our listeners, for tuning in. And we very much hope that you'll download more Rethinking Cyber podcasts from Spotify and Apple. We also look forward to welcoming you on the ground at GCF on the 1st and 2nd of November in Riyadh. Until then, take care and goodbye.